An old man sits on a black volcanic rock in the middle of the Aegean Sea. The wind off the water is salt and cold. Beneath him, the island is a slab of cooled lava, 2.5 miles wide, with no fresh water that matters, and no soil that forgives. The Romans use it as a dumping ground for political prisoners. They have dumped him here because he refused to call the emperor Lord and God. His name is John. He is the last living apostle. 60 years ago, he stood at the foot of a cross and watched his rabbi die. 40 years ago, he watched Jerusalem burn. And now, old exiled the last witness. He is seeing something else, a vision. He is writing it down as fast as his hand will move. Across his knees is a scroll. The ink is wet. The letters are Greek, and somewhere in the middle of what he is writing, he will set down a number that the world will not stop arguing about for the next 2,000 years. 6, 6, 6, the number of the beast. And here is what no one tells you. Centuries from now, in the sand of an Egyptian rubbish heap outside a forgotten town called Oxyrhynchus, a scholar will dig up a scrap of papyrus from this exact passage. The ink will be faded, the Greek will be clear, and the number on the page will not be 666. It will be 660. We will come back to that, but not yet, because before you can understand what John wrote, before you can understand the mark and the number, and the beast, you have to understand the world. The words were written into. You have to stand where his readers stood. You have to feel what they felt when this scroll arrived at their door. This is not a story about a barcode. This is not a story about a microchip. This is not a story about an end times conspiracy on a podcast somebody told you to listen to. This is a story about a question that every Christian in the Roman Empire was asked at the point of a sword. A question with 2 answers. One of them got you a piece of bread and a quiet life. The other one got you killed. And before we can decode the number we have to meet the people who had to choose, the year is 112. You are standing in a courtroom in Bithynia, a Roman province on the northern coast of what is now Turkey. The governor sits on a raised platform. His name is Pliny, a Roman aristocrat, polished, polite, methodical. He is not cruel by nature. He writes letters home to his friends about the weather and his vineyards. He keeps notes. And right now, he is keeping notes on you. In his hand is a list of names, Christians, reported by neighbors. Some of you he has never met. Some of you he ate dinner beside last winter. It does not matter. The test is the same for everyone. On a small bronze table in front of him sit 3 objects, a pinch of incense, a bowl of wine, and a small statue of the emperor no taller than a man's forearm. Pliny will write a letter about this moment to the emperor Trajan himself, and that letter will survive for 2,000 years. In it, he describes exactly what he is about to ask you to do. Burn a grain of incense to the image. Pour out a sip of wine. Curse the name of Christ. 3 small motions. That is all. Refuse, and Pliny has the legal right to execute you on the spot. Here's what most people miss. This was not a one-time tragedy in one Roman province. This was the air the early church breathed. Across the empire, in every major city, the same test was waiting. The same incense, the same image, the same question. And every Christian who received John's letter from Patmos was reading it with that test on the horizon. Now pull back from Bithynia. Sail west across the Aegean all the way to Rome. Go back another 50 years. The year is 64. The city is on fire. Tacitus, the Roman historian. No friend of the Church, a man who called Christians a mischievous superstition, writes about what happened next. The Emperor Nero needs someone to blame for the fire. He chooses the Christians. And what he does to them, Tacitus records in cold Latin prose that historians have not stopped reading since. He has them sewn into the skins of wild animals and torn to pieces by dogs in the arena. He has them crucified along the road that leads to the Vatican Hill in rows like a fence post made of human beings. And at night in his private gardens, he has them coated in pitch, tied to wooden stakes, and lit on fire to provide the lighting for his dinner parties. This is the world John's readers lived in. This was not a bad dream their grandparents told them about. This was Tuesday, and it is into this world that the name Antipas arrives. You meet him only once in a single line of Revelation chapter 2. Antipas, my faithful witness, who was slain among you, where Satan dwells. That is all John writes, but early church tradition fills in what John leaves blank. Antipas was the pastor of the church in Pergamum. He was an old man, some sources say in his 90s. He refused to burn the incense. He refused to curse the name. And so the Romans took a hollow bronze bull they used for executions, placed him inside, and lit a fire underneath. He died singing. Now hold all of that in your mind. The governor's table, the fires of Rome, the bronze bull at Pergamum. And then ask yourself, when John on his rock in the Aegean picks up his pen and writes about a mark on the right hand or on the forehead, what do you think his readers heard? They did not hear microchips. They heard the brand. The Greek word John uses is charagma. It does not mean tattoo. It does not mean barcode. It means an engraved or stamped imprint. In the 1st century, charagma was the brand burned into the shoulder of a slave to mark which household he belonged to. It was the seal pressed into a Roman coin to certify the metal was Caesar's. It was the mark a soldier received when he swore his loyalty oath to his commander. A charagma was the answer to one question, and one question only. Who owns you? So when John writes that a beast will cause everyone small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on the right hand or the forehead, his readers are not thinking about a device under their skin. They are thinking about the governor's table. They are thinking about Antipas. They are thinking about the question every one of them already knows is coming. Not whether they will be marked, but by whom. So before we open the number itself, pause for one breath. If you have made it this far into the video, you are not the kind of person who came here for clickbait. You came here because you want to read this passage the way the people who first heard it read it, the way Antipas read it, the way Polycarp read it, the way the woman in the back row of a house church in Ephesus read it when the parchment arrived from Patmos and somebody unrolled it by candlelight. If that is who you are, take 1 second. Tap subscribe. The next part is where the number cracks open. Then come back, because the math is about to get strange. Here is what John writes. Hold the sentence in your hand for a moment, because the very first thing he says about the number is a clue. Almost nobody slows down to read. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Here is wisdom. 3 words. A flag in the text. John is doing something he does in only one other place. In Revelation, he is telling the reader openly, this part takes work. Pay attention. The Greek word he uses for understanding is nous, the mind. the faculty of figuring things out. He is not asking for prophetic dreams. He is asking for arithmetic. And then he says something most modern readers fly right past. The number is the number of a man. Arithmos anthropo. Not the number of a machine. Not the number of a system. Not the number of a worldwide government in a distant century. The number of a man. A specific human being. With a face, with a name. But it gets stranger. To his first readers, the number of a man was not a riddle. It was a category. Every Jew and every Greek of the first century knew how to do this kind of math. The system has a name. In Hebrew, it is called gematria. In Greek, it is called isopsephy. And here is how it works. Every letter in the alphabet is also a number. Aleph is 1. Bet is 2. Gimel is 3. All the way through, the Greek alphabet does the same thing. Alpha is 1 beta, is 2 gamma, is 3. So, any word, any name adds up to a single sum, a signature in numbers. This was not a secret occult code. This was their alphabet doing math. Archaeologists have dug up graffiti from the walls of Pompeii buried by Vesuvius in 79 A.D. That reads, "I love her whose number is 545. That was a love note. A teenage boy scratching his girlfriend's name in numerical code on a wall so his friends could not read it. This is the world John is writing into. A world where adding up a name was as ordinary as a crossword puzzle. So when John writes, "Count the number of the beast," it is the number of a man. His readers know exactly what he is asking them to do. Add up a name. Now stay with me, because here is where 2,000 years of detective work begins. The candidate. Every serious New Testament historian comes back to again and again, is one man, the emperor who burned Christians as torches in his garden, the emperor whose persecution was so brutal that even the pagan historian Tacitus called it monstrous, the emperor who killed Peter, the emperor who killed Paul, Nero. In Hebrew letters, the name Nero Caesar is written NRWWNQSR, 6 consonants. Hebrew did not write the vowels, readers added them as they went. And every one of those 6 consonants has a number. Nun is 50, Resh is 200, Vav is 6, Nun again 50, Kof is 100, Samech is 60, Resh again 200. Add them up. 50 plus 200, plus 6 plus 50 plus 100, plus 60 plus 200. 666. That is not a coincidence. That is a fingerprint. John is writing a letter that is going to pass through Roman hands on its way to 7 churches scattered across Asia Minor. If he writes the emperor, Nero is the beast in plain Greek, his letter never reaches its destination, and everyone holding a copy dies. So he encrypts the name. He gives his readers the number and the rule for decoding it, and trusts them to do the math. Here is the part nobody tells you. Remember the scrap of papyrus from the Egyptian rubbish heap? The one we left back in Patmos in the first 2 minutes of this video. The one that read 616 instead of 666. Now you are ready for it. The papyrus is real. It is called P115. It was found in a garbage dump outside the town of Oxyrhynchus in Egypt sometime in the late 1800s. It sat in a museum drawer for nearly a century before anyone published what was on it. When they finally did, in 1999, the world's manuscript scholars confirmed it. The oldest surviving copy we have of Revelation chapter 13 does not say 666. It says 616. For 2,000 years, people assumed that was a scribe's mistake. But it is not a mistake. It is a translation. Here is why. In Greek, the emperor's name was spelled the way Romans actually said it. Nero. Neron in Greek transliteration becomes Naran in Hebrew, and the final nun adds another 50 to the count, giving you 666. But if you take the Latin spelling of the name, the way you would see it on a Roman coin or a public inscription, the final nun is not there. The Hebrew spelling drops to Nero Qsar, and the number drops by 50, from 666 to 616. Two different spellings of the same name, the same emperor, the same beast. The scribes copying John in Egypt 2 centuries later knew exactly who he was talking about, and they wrote it in the spelling that made sense to them. And we know they knew this because around the year 180, the church father Irenaeus, a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John himself, writes a defense of the 666 reading. He addresses the 616 variant directly, which means by Irenaeus's day, less than a century after John put down his pen on Patmos, both readings were already in circulation. 2 manuscript traditions. One target, Nero Caesar. So, if Nero is the beast, and Nero died by his own hand in the year 68, 4 decades before Revelation was even finished, what does this passage mean for you 2,000 years later, sitting wherever you are sitting right now, because Nero is dead? But the question Revelation asks is not, listen carefully, because for 2,000 years, the church has read this passage through 4 different lenses, and you have probably only been told about one of them. The first lens is called preterist. It says everything in Revelation 13 already happened. The beast was Nero. The mark was the imperial loyalty cult. The persecution was the fires of Rome and the bronze bull at Pergamum. Revelation in this view is not a forecast. It is a wartime letter. A first-century pastor writing in code to his bleeding congregation, telling them to hold on, because the empire that is killing them is going to fall. And it did. The temple in Jerusalem burned to the ground in 70. Within 400 years, Rome itself was on its knees. The preterist looks at all of that and says, John was right. It happened. We are reading the receipts. The second lens is called historicist. It says the beast is not one man. It is a pattern that repeats across history. Every empire that has ever raised an idol and demanded worship is the beast. Nero, yes, but also Diocletian, 4 centuries later, burning Bibles in the streets, the medieval Inquisitions, Napoleon at the gates of Rome, Stalin and the gulags, Hitler and the camps. Every dictator who has ever pressed a charagma onto the hand of his people and said, swear or die, is the beast wearing another face. The number does not point to one emperor. It points to a kind of emperor that human history keeps producing. The third lens is called futurist. It says the worst beast has not yet appeared, that a final figure, what Paul calls the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians, will rise at the end of history and demand the world's worship one last time. The mark in this reading is still coming, the persecution still ahead. John was not writing about Nero only. He was writing about the prototype, and the original is still on its way. The fourth lens is called idealist. It says all of the above are partly true, but none of them are the point. The mark of the beast is not a moment in history at all. It is a spiritual reality woven into every age. There has always been a beast. There has always been a charagma. There has always been a kingdom that demands your worship in exchange for your bread. And there always will be until the Lamb who was slain sits on the throne, and the kingdoms of the world become the kingdom of our God. Here's the part nobody tells you. These four lenses do not actually contradict each other. They are looking at the same passage from four different distances. The preterist sees the trees. The historicist sees the forest. The futurist sees the horizon. The idealist sees the soil under all of it. And every single one of them, without exception, comes back to the same word: allegiance. The mark of the beast is not, and has never been, primarily about technology. It is about ownership. It is about the question every empire in human history eventually asks every person who lives under it. Whose name do you bear? Whose stamp is on you? Whose mouth do you open when the incense goes on the table and the wine is poured out and the small statue of the emperor sits there waiting? And here is the part of Revelation almost no one preaches. The mark has an opposite. In chapter 7, just 6 chapters before John writes about the mark of the beast, he writes about another mark entirely. He sees an angel coming from the east, and the angel cries out with a loud voice to 4 other angels, and he says, "Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees, until we have sealed the servants of our God upon their foreheads." Sealed. The Greek word is phrages, and it is not the same word as charagma. It is the exact semantic opposite. Charagma is the brand. A slave owner burns into the skin of his property. Sphragus is the wax seal. A king presses onto a letter to say, "This belongs to me. No one may break it open. No one may tamper with it. Anyone who tries answers to me." Paul uses this exact word in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 13. He tells a small church in a Greek port city that the moment they believed they were sealed, sphragus, with the Holy Spirit of promise. The same word John uses on Patmos, the same kind of mark, but pressed by a different hand. This is not a tattoo. It is not a number on your skin. It is not a device under your wrist. It is the brand of a kingdom, and John wanted you to know there are only 2 kingdoms left. You have been marked your whole life. You wear the logos of companies that have never met you. You salute flags you did not design. You carry the name of a family you did not choose. You bear the marks of 1,000 small allegiances you barely notice anymore. The apps you open before you pray. The voices you trust before you trust Scripture. The kingdoms you have quietly let stamp themselves onto your forehead while you were not paying attention. You have always belonged to something. The only question John ever asked from that rock in the Aegean was the question every human being eventually has to answer. Not whether you will be marked, but by whom. And that is not a question about a future microchip. That is a question about Tuesday morning, about the next time you open your phone, about the next vote you cast, about the next thing you bow your head to before you have noticed you are bowing. So before we close, 3 things to carry with you. The first thing to carry with you is this. The mark of the beast was a 1st century allegiance test before it was anything else. To understand it, you start where John started. You start in Rome. You start at the governor's table. You start with the incense and the wine and the small statue of the emperor. And the question every Christian in the empire was about to be asked: If you skip that starting point, you will read this passage as a forecast. If you stand inside it, you will read it as a letter, and it was always a letter first. The second thing is this. Every kingdom on earth wants to put its brand on you. Caesar did it with coins and incense. The world today does it with quieter currencies: attention, fear, identity, belonging. The pressure to be marked is not new. It is just dressed differently. It comes in your headlines. It comes in your feeds. It comes in the way a small voice inside you starts asking whether you really need to be so different from everyone else. The beast in John's day was a man on a throne with a sword. The beast in your day is often a whisper you have stopped questioning. Pay attention to this, because the third thing is the one I want you to take to bed tonight. There is only one mark that lasts past death, and it is not on your hand. It is not on your forehead. It is not on a coin or a banner or a flag. It is on a lamb who was slain and who knows your name. The Greek word for it is sphragus, the seal, and if you belong to him, you have already been marked. You have already been claimed. The blood is already on the doorframe. The brand is already on the shoulder, and no power in heaven or on earth or under the earth can break that seal, because the one who pressed it down is the same one who rose on the third day, with the keys to death itself in his hand. The only question left is whether you will live like it. So here is what I want to ask you before you close this video. If mark in Greek really means a brand of ownership, what is the loudest mark you wear right now? Not the one that scares you, the one you barely notice. Tell me in the comments below. I read them. 2,000 years ago, an old man on a volcanic rock in the middle of the Aegean Sea picked up a pen and asked 7 dying churches a question they could not avoid. 2,000 years later, the question is still on the table, and it is still yours to answer.